If there are young Americans out there, and it doesn't have to be young Americans either, because a lot of people in mid-career decide that they want to give back to this country of ours. Again, I encourage you to be thinking about public service. The world is a challenging place. I think the United States is facing a lot of challenges. It's not just COVID-19 and the economic dislocations associated with it. You have the cyber challenges, you have China, you have the issues with Russia, you have instability in a number of areas of the world. You still have the threat of terrorism. And we need to make sure that we're able to tap into the best and brightest within this large melting pot of the US population. And I never dreamed, having come from a blue collar, middle class family in New Jersey, that I would have the opportunity to participate in such worthwhile endeavors and efforts, but also to one day become director of CIA. So again, I would just encourage Americans out there to really be thinking about ways that they can give back to this great country of ours.
So I recently read a quote that the CIA's official motto, the work of a nation, the center of intelligence, is so boring that it can only be a cover. Well, whether or not it's a cover, as our guest knows from a career of service to the agency and our nation, his time at the CIA and in intelligence was anything but boring, all the way from the comically misplaced facial hair of a young agent attempting disguise to soul searching about critical moral issues to the Situation Room during the raid that took out bin Laden, and right up to nearly the present day in the extraordinary course of politics in Washington. Our guest, former CIA Director John Brennan, has been there doing the work of the nation and surely not bored. I'm Mary Eintema, the president and CEO of World Boston, and we are all delighted that John Brennan is here for tonight's Chat and Chowder book talk on Undaunted, My Fight Against America's Enemies at Home and Abroad. John O. Brennan served as director of the Central Intelligence Agency under President Obama from March 2013 until January 2017. From January 2009 to March 2013, he was assistant to President Obama for Homeland Security and Counterterrorism. Mr. Brennan began his government service at the CIA, where he worked from 1980 to 2005 and specialized in Middle Eastern affairs and counterterrorism. He served as the CIA's intelligence briefer to President Clinton, chief of staff to then Director of Central Intelligence George Tenet, and deputy executive director. He graduated from Fordham with a bachelor's in political science and studied for a year at the American University in Cairo. John Brennan earned a master's degree in government and Middle Eastern studies at the University of Texas at Austin. Currently, he's a distinguished fellow at the Center on National Security at Fordham Law School, a distinguished scholar at the University of Texas at Austin, a senior intelligence and national security analyst for NBC, and an advisor to a variety of private sector companies. And John Brennan is here with us tonight, and we're very pleased to welcome you to World Boston. Go right ahead, please.
Well, thank you so much, Mary. And I want to thank World Boston for giving me this opportunity to visit Boston virtually. I was mentioning to Mary earlier that I miss traveling and visiting Boston. I try to do it several times a year, but it's good to be with you, at least in spirit, across the virtual airwaves. And I appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about Undaunted before addressing your questions. I'm very interested in hearing what you would like me to speak about. But let me go through a couple of things related to my memoir. First of all, why did I write this memoir? I wasn't planning to write a memoir, even when I was director of CIA. I thought I was going to leave most of my government career behind me. And given the sensitivity of a lot of things that I talked about, I thought I was never going to have the opportunity to write a memoir. But after thinking about it, I decided I wanted to share with others my experiences for two principal purposes. One, I would like to encourage as many young Americans as possible to pursue a career in national security. I do think it's very, very important for all Americans to be able to give back to this wonderful country of ours. We have had such great good fortune living in this country. And whether or not someone's going to pursue a life in intelligence or in diplomacy or law enforcement or military, or giving back to one's local community, I do think it's important that we all think about ways that we can give back to this great country of ours. And by talking a little bit about my experiences over 33 plus years, I wanted to entice, encourage, and try to lead individuals to think about the intelligence national security realm as being an attractive career opportunity for them. So hopefully by publishing this memoir, I've given young Americans of all different backgrounds the thought that maybe government service is something that they would like to pursue. Secondly, when I was in intelligence for so many years, and particularly when I worked at the White House for President Obama, and then also as director of CIA, I had to deal with a lot of misrepresentations of what I thought was the truth and the facts. And so this gave me an opportunity to lay out my version of events and my perspective on so many issues and try to present as many facts as I could, because there was a lot of misinformation and even disinformation out there about the CIA, its role, my role, what I did. And so this gave me an opportunity to put down on paper and in the book what I think were some important events in my life that I wanted to make sure the American public had the opportunity to at least read my account. I probably will not convince a lot of my detractors out there about the validity of my version of events, but I just felt it was important to do that. I should state at the outset, I am not a partisan. I'm not a Democrat or Republican. I am a former government official. It's a bit ironic, but when I was in the Obama White House and director of CIA for a Democratic president, most of my detractors were Democrats in Congress, who a number of them called for my resignation or firing because they didn't like either things that I did or said. I have been referred to as an equal opportunity offender. I tend to be a bit outspoken. I was outspoken when I was in government to make sure that I told truth to power, but also since my departure from government in January of 2017, some of you may have noticed that I've been a bit outspoken as well. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So my story, I am the son of an immigrant. My father emigrated from Ireland when he was 28 years old in 1948. And he always impressed upon my brother, sister, and myself just how special it was to be an American citizen. He strove for 28 years to come to this land of opportunity. And he said we should never take for granted the fact that we were American citizens by birth. He complained that too often it is those that have citizenship by birth that do not recognize just how special it is to be an American. And so instilled in me at a young age was just how important America was in the world, but also what it meant to be an American citizen. I grew up in New Jersey, went to Fordham University. I was a commuter student, but I did have the opportunity during my college years to have two very important overseas experiences that contributed to my wanderlust and led me to then ultimately apply to the CIA. The first was I spent the summer of my freshman year in college in Indonesia. My cousin was the Food for Peace officer for the U.S. Agency for International Development at the U.S. Embassy in Jakarta, Indonesia. And so he invited me to go over there, and I did. And I wrote a tutorial for Fordham. I was able to get 3 credits for a paper on oil and politics in Indonesia. But while I was over there, I really was able to put what it means to be an American into a broader global context. I traveled throughout Java, went over to Bali, got to see a lot of poverty and people who just eked out their daily lives and existence from the land. And a lot of times the Indonesians who saw me would come up to me and talk to me and want to learn as much as they could about what is it like to be an American. And so it really impressed upon me just how, again, special it was to be an American. And then in my junior year, I went to the American University in Cairo. I was tired of commuting back and forth from New Jersey over to New York. And so I took advantage of a junior year abroad program to go over to Cairo. And it was when I first started to learn about the Middle East, studied Arabic, and it allowed me once again to just put the globe in a better context for me so that I understood the role of the United States in world affairs, because I engaged in a lot of conversations with my colleagues and classmates at AUC, Egyptian students, Palestinians, and others, about what was going on in the world. And so it was a real introduction for me into world politics. And so when I went back to Fordham and then went over to the University of Texas for graduate school, I applied to CIA, and fortunately I was hired by the CIA after I got my master's from Texas. When I joined the CIA, I started out in operations. And as Mary mentioned, I had a couple of missteps with my operational activities early on. And it convinced me that maybe operations was not best for me. And so I decided to switch over into analysis. Now, the CIA has a number of important missions. One important mission is the operations, which is the clandestine collection of intelligence, either through the use of human sources. CIA officers go overseas and recruit spies in different countries to report back, or they engage in technical collection activities overseas to, again, gain insight into issues that have a direct impact on U.S. national security. Another mission is analysis, to take all information that comes in from these clandestine sources, as well as from our embassies overseas, as well as other sources of information, and produce analytic assessments and daily analytic pieces so that the President and National Security Council members and others are able to understand some of the dynamics that are underway in the world. Another mission of the CIA is covert action. This is when a president decides that the hand of the United States government needs to be camouflaged in its attempts to shape events overseas. And the CIA has been involved in a number of covert action programs over the years. Another issue is counterintelligence, to try to defeat the efforts on the part of other intelligence and security services to clandestinely acquire information about the United States and try to undermine our security. Then a final mission of the CIA is our liaison engagements, working with overseas intelligence and security services so that we're able to partner with them on shared objectives and goals, and also work together to try to address common threats. And so when I joined the CIA, I had a little bit of an understanding of its mission, but when I got into the CIA and was a CIA employee, I was able to understand what was required for individuals who were going into operations or analysis, covert action, counterintelligence, or working on the liaison front. And so for the first dozen years or so of my CIA career, I worked on Middle East issues. I was able to serve in Saudi Arabia on a rotation with the Department of State. It allowed me to understand in depth what it's like to work inside of an embassy, a U.S. embassy abroad, how the different parts of the U.S. government that are represented in the embassy interact with one another. I interacted with Saudi officials, and it also allowed me to enhance my Arabic language capabilities when I was over there. So it was an exciting couple of years that I was there. I write about it in my memoir, talk about some of the terrorist attacks that were taking place in the Middle East at the time when my wife and I were in Saudi Arabia. And then come back to the United States and served in different capacities in CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, mostly on the analytics side, and to really work on trying to enhance my tradecraft in terms of my analytic capabilities, my understanding of the intelligence mission, and understanding how the CIA fits into that broader framework of U.S. national security agencies and departments. Let me just touch upon a couple of the key issues or events that I was involved in over the years. One is that I served for 6 presidents, from Jimmy Carter to Barack Obama. And I got to know 4 of those presidents fairly well. George H.W. Bush, Bush 41. I didn't really know him that well when he was president, although it was my first visit to the Oval Office when he was president of the United States. And I must tell you, the first time a visit of a CIA officer to the Oval Office is a rather intimidating experience. And I was exceptionally nervous going in there. But he put me at great ease George H.W. Bush, before he became president of the United States, had been vice president for 8 years under Ronald Reagan, but he had also been CIA director for about a year. So he was very well familiar with the intelligence mission and CIA's mission. But I got to know George H.W. Bush pretty well after he left office, because when I became CIA director, he invited myself and my wife, Kathy, down to Houston, Texas to have lunch and dinner with him and his wife, Barbara Bush, so that we had a chance to bring him up to date on what was going on at CIA. He was somebody who was very, very interested in CIA's mission and always had a very soft spot in his heart for the women and men who served at CIA. So I got to know him pretty well. Bill Clinton, I had the great good fortune of being his daily intelligence briefer. You hear recently about the reference to the President's Daily Brief, the PDB. This is the publication that's produced 6 days a week, Monday through Saturday, that's given to the president and the key national security officials. I was the president's daily briefer for about a year or so. So every morning I would go down to the White House and brief President Clinton, Vice President Gore, and some of the other senior officials in the White House at the time, Tony Lake, the National Security Advisor, and a few others. And it really allowed me to understand just how intelligence fits into a president's daily routine and how intelligence helps to shape and form the views of the president and others on the national security issues that they have to deal with. So it was a great experience for me, having the opportunity to, again, go down there on a daily basis and get to know President Clinton, who has an amazing, amazing mind in terms of his ability to absorb and process information, and tremendous powers of recall. I think he had a photographic memory, because he would remember things that I had told him or that he had read in the PDB long after I had long forgotten about them. George W. Bush, I had the opportunity to work fairly closely with him during his 8 years in office, or certainly during his the first 4 years in the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks. He asked me to stand up what's called the National Counterterrorism Center. This was an effort after 9/11 to bring together the various databases and networks and expertise that reside in CIA and FBI and the Department of Homeland Security that was just standing up, and other departments and agencies that were involved in counterterrorism. It was one of the recommendations that came out of the 9/11 Commission to try to ensure that there was going to be some place in the US government where those proverbial dots could be connected. And so I had the great honor of working with some others and standing up the National Counterterrorism Center. And it was something that George W. Bush was very, very interested in. And so I would have to report to him and go down to the White House on a fairly regular basis to let him know about the progress that was being made there. And then serving in Barack Obama's administration for the first 4 years, working as his Homeland Security Advisor and Senior Advisor on Counterterrorism. My office was right below the Oval Office in the West Wing of the White House. And so it took me about 20 seconds at most to get out of my office, bound up the stairs, and be in his office. And too frequently, unfortunately, I had to go there at a moment's notice because of some breaking development. But it was the first time in my government career that I was not working in the intelligence community, aside from my rotation with State Department earlier on in Saudi Arabia. I was actually on the policymaking side. And so my job was to make sure the president was fully informed about the terrorist threat and the status of Homeland Security, but also to bring to President Obama the recommendations and the opportunities to take action against terrorist operatives before they were able to launch attacks. And so again, in my memoir, I talk about some of those interactions that I had with President Obama as we were trying to take down the Al-Qaeda's terrorist network that was quite extensive. And sometimes we had to take offensive actions against these terrorist enclaves and hideouts, because they were poised to carry out what would have been very deadly attacks. One of the things about Al-Qaeda For many years, they were determined to carry out another attack against the United States using airliners. And they attempted several times to bring improvised explosive devices, IEDs, onto airplanes. And thankfully, they were either thwarted by the good work that was done by the intelligence and law enforcement communities working with our overseas partners, or by the ineptitude of the terrorists who were trying to fabricate these IEDs. But the opportunity to work and to see firsthand these four presidents, George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and then Barack Obama, it really gave me a tremendous sense of respect and admiration for these individuals. There were some of their policies that I didn't agree with, but I never, ever had a sense that they were not doing things that they thought were in the best interest of the United States. And I heard more than one of them say, I don't care about the politics of this. It's the right thing to do, which I think is the responsibility of a president of the United States. And maybe that's why I became somewhat outspoken after I left government about Donald Trump, that I didn't feel as though he was putting the interests of the American people first and foremost, and was not, I think, capable of carrying out the very weighty responsibilities of the office of the presidency. A couple of other things about my time in government. As I mentioned, I was President Obama's counterterrorism advisor at the White House when we launched the raid against the bin Laden compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan. It was the most secretive, intense, nerve-wracking experience that I had during my 33-year career. Tremendous work and diligence that was done by so many individuals over the years to track him down. After the 9/11 attacks, he really burrowed into a variety of places, first in Afghanistan, then in Pakistan. And it was because of the determination and perseverance of a lot of individuals working in different departments and agencies that were able to find him in Pakistan, in that compound. And then because of the tremendous skill and courage and competence of U.S. Special Forces, we were able to carry out the raid against that compound. And so I detail in the book, what it was like in the months leading up to that assault, in the days before, and just how nerve-wracking it was. And for me, the most nerve-wracking part of that assault was after the assault took place in the compound and bin Laden was shot and killed, and we were pretty confident that it was bin Laden who was killed. Our forces had to travel back by helicopter into Afghanistan. And by the time that the raid was completed, but before the helicopters left, the Pakistani authorities in the area were alerted, and the Pakistani Air Force was notified. And so they put their radars on, they had sent up some aircraft. And I was very concerned that those helicopters that were going to be going back in a 90-minute or so ride into Afghanistan might have encountered enemy fire. And even if we killed bin Laden, if one or two of those helicopters were shot down and a dozen or two of our special forces were killed, it would not have been a successful mission. And so those 90 minutes or so, I was just nervous as hell, hoping and praying that those helicopters were going to make it back to Afghanistan, and they did. But this is something that was a result of many years of tedious work and dedication on the part of a lot of folks in the intelligence community, and the teamwork that took place between the White House, the CIA, Department of Defense, and others. It was just exceptional. And I was very fortunate to be a part of that great effort that took place. I also talk in the book about the Russian interference in the election of 2016, which was very unfortunate, but at the same time, I really feel as though the U.S. government, intelligence, law enforcement really tried their best to to prevent the interference. And this really, I think, reflects the great challenge that the cyber environment presents to us today and in the future. Just recently, in the past few months, we have learned, and there have been press reports about the intrusion that appears to be Russian intelligence made into government and private sector networks, something called SolarWinds, that really underscore just how fragile some of those systems are to these foreign government intrusions. And therefore, it's critically important in my mind that the CIA and FBI and NSA and other departments and agencies of the US government be able to work together to deal with these threats. And again, I try to provide my up close and personal perspective about what happened in those last remaining months of 2016 and what we did to try to prevent the Russians from interfering. So let me just finish up before taking your questions where I started off, which was, again, if there are young Americans out there, and it doesn't have to be young Americans either, because a lot of people in mid-career decide that they want to give back to this country of ours. Again, I encourage you to be thinking about public service. The world is a challenging place. I think the United States is facing a lot of challenges. It's not just COVID-19 and the economic dislocations associated with it. You have the cyber challenges. You have China. You have the issues with Russia. You have instability in a number of areas of the world. You still have the threat of terrorism. And we need to make sure that we're able to tap into the best and brightest within this large melting pot of the US population. And I never dreamed, having come from a blue-collar, middle-class family in New Jersey, that I would have the opportunity to participate in such worthwhile endeavors and efforts, but also to one day become director of CIA. So again, I would just encourage Americans out there to really be thinking about ways that they can give back to this great country of ours. And with that, Mary, I look forward to questions from your audience.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I am going to resist, I'm going to try really hard to resist the temptation to ask my own questions, because this is such an amazing opportunity. But I think we're going to go to Mary Mendoza. If you're ready, Mary.
Yes, I am actually. I'm actually in the middle of reading a book called Legacy of Ashes, which is about the CIA. It lays the blame for the politicization of intelligence, starting with Richard Nixon, who leaned on the CIA to alter its estimates of Soviet military capabilities, and that happened in 1969.
Okay.
Given how politicized in a very public fashion things have come, including especially national security, especially with the most recent ex-president Donald Trump, who disagreed with just about everything that intelligence community had to say, and went out to really extraordinary lengths to beat up on the intelligence community and diminish publicly America's confidence in anything they had to do and say. How would you go about getting people and convincing them that this is indeed a worthy effort, especially when you have such a public figure beating up on the CIA and the national security apparatus?
Thank you.
Yeah, well, thanks for that question, Mary. It really comes down to leadership. And as you pointed out, unfortunately, Donald Trump was very disparaging and denigrating of the work of the intelligence community and the men and women who sacrifice tremendously for their fellow citizens. But it's not just the White House leadership that's required. It's very strong leadership within the intelligence community. And again, unfortunately, I think Donald Trump demonstrated that with his appointment of John Radcliffe, as well as Richard Grenell. They were very, highly partisan individuals. But I must say that my interactions with some of my former colleagues, they did their best, even during the Trump years, to prevent the politicization of the intelligence work, whether it be the analytic work or the operational work or other things. They recognize that they have certain responsibilities, and they may have Republican or Democratic leanings, but when they go to work at CIA, whether it be in the United States or abroad, they have to leave those political affiliations behind. And The CIA has had some, history, as you pointed out, during the Nixon years and other years about politicization of the agency's capabilities. But I will say that over time, I think there have been a number of reforms and changes. And I do think that CIA, Gina Haspel appears to have withstood a lot of pressures from the Trump White House in terms of releasing information that would have been detrimental to our national security. So I am concerned that if you have individuals either at the White House or running the intelligence community, you have that great potential for politicization. But Avril Haines, who's the current director of national intelligence, she was my former deputy at CIA, and Bill Burns, the former Deputy Secretary of State, who's been nominated to be CIA Director. These are two individuals of great and tremendous integrity. And I believe that they're going to not have a political bone in their body because they recognize the importance of maintaining the independence, the integrity, and professionalism of the intelligence mission.
Great. I think we'll go to Paul now. Paul, go right ahead.
Director Brennan, thank you so much. Chris Krebs had a couple of interviews in the Financial Times about cybersecurity and talked about the Russians. And is there anything we can do to counteract it, or is it just defend against it?
Well, I think almost it's a combination of all the above. The internet provides just tremendous opportunity for advancing the human condition. There are so many things that, as a result of having the internet out there, at the same time, it presents a lot of opportunities for malactors, whether they be foreign intelligence services or even domestic malactors, to take advantage of that environment. And I do think that there is a lot that is yet can be done. I've been a long proponent of having a bipartisan independent commission established by Congress, just like we did after 9/11, that would bring together engineers and futurists, technologists, people who really have tremendous expertise and experience, not just in the cyber world, but also in the banking, financial, academic worlds, to try to help identify ways that we can strengthen the World Wide Web. Unfortunately, the World Wide Web doesn't respect sovereign borders, but the United States, I think, can take a leading role working with a number of our allies and partners around the globe in terms of setting and establishing some norms and standards in terms of what is appropriate behavior. But I don't think we're ever going to get to the point of having this digital domain be impenetrable. I think there have been just such dynamic developments and technological developments in that environment that those who want to do harm find ways to navigate within that environment. But I do think that we need to have a much more comprehensive, strategic, and in-depth look at how we're going to make the digital domain and more be able to defend it more, ensure its resilience, recovery from these types of attacks. But I do think it's one of the key challenges of the decades ahead, because that digital environment is the environment where most human activity takes place. And again, with technology advancing as rapidly as it has, ensuring that the defenses are going to be maximized is one of the real, I think, objectives and challenges that we have.
Great, thank you. Let's go to Raul.
Here we go. Thank you very much. My question, Director Brennan, is about the development of tradecraft, particularly in the cyber world. Are you confident? What can you tell us about the development of skills for operatives in the CIA and maybe in the NSA as well, in developing tradecraft in the cyber world that will give us an edge on our adversaries?
Yeah, well, your point is a good one, a great one. When I was at CIA, I reorganized the agency, and for the first time in 50 years, I established a new directorate. So we had the Directorate of Operations, Analysis, scientific, science and technology and support. But I established a fifth directorate, which was the Directorate of Digital Innovation, because we need to make sure, as you point out, that we're able to develop and nurture those technical skills, those digital skills in the cyber domain that we're going to be able to leverage in order to advance our national security as well as to defend our systems and networks. And cyber, it just continues to explode in terms of its growth. And in my short lifetime, when I started at CIA in 1980, we didn't have personal computers. Everything was in hard copy. And it seems as though that the rate of technological advancement just keeps accelerating. And that's where the CIA and NSA and others really have to tap into the tremendous technical expertise that exists in this country. And that's why I encourage young Americans, especially those with technical skills, to think about joining the government. Because maybe you're not going to make the same salary that you're going to make from, Silicon Valley company or somewhere else, but that psychic reward, I think, is going to be just tremendous. And one of the things that I would encourage our recruiters at CIA to tell, the young students, our recruiters were very concerned that people are going to come to the CIA just for 2 or 3 years to get the CIA on their resume and then go off and, make, $1 bazillion somewhere else. I told our folks that gives us 2 or 3 years to convince those technical experts that there's no better place to work on these cyber challenges than in the intelligence community. And I must say that more and more of the millennials and others who have a reputation for bouncing around, they wanted to stay at CIA or NSA or FBI because the work is so challenging, but also the work is so important. And that's what we need to do, is to encourage these young Americans with these tremendous skills to come in and join the national security effort.
Wonderful. Okay, let's go to Kyra.
Hi, Mary. Thank you. Thank you, Director Brennan, so much for your remarks. I am really looking forward to reading your book. I just want to give you some context. I am a 24-year veteran of the Federal Service, and I'm proud to be a scientist for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. And also wanted to tell you that I helped inspire my young family member who's in her 20s and serves as a mathematician supporting the mission. So thank you. There are many of them out there. My question relates to my role as a scientist. I'm curious if, especially with your time in Saudi Arabia, could you comment on how you feel the US and our allies would benefit from the climate change goals that we've established and we've now recommitted to as a nation as it relates to international security, and how it would allow us and our allies to reduce conflict in the world? And as you said, you spent 10 years in Saudi Arabia, so nobody knows better than you the impact of oil and gas on international conflict. Thank you.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for your service. And I encourage all young scientists and technologists to, again, think about government service. I have a daughter who just finished up her doctorate in biomedical engineering, and she is looking at a variety of opportunities right now in public service. A couple of months ago, whether it was in an interview or a tweet or something, identified climate change as one of the key, if not the key, national security challenge, an international security challenge of our time, because it has tremendous effects and potential ill effects on global peace and security. Whether you're talking about rising temperatures, rising sea waters, encroachment upon coastal communities, the migration of individuals to urban centers or across borders because there's no arable land or flooding and other types of things. It has tremendous dislocations economically, socially, politically, and it leads to interstate tensions and conflict. I mean, look at how Europe and even the United States are dealing with migration flows, and some of those migration flows are directly relatable to climate issues. And so trying to reverse or to stop the trends, whether it be on greenhouse gas emissions or the continued use of fossil fuels, thinking about how we're going to move more and more to renewable energy sources so we can reduce the stress and strain on our planet. This is something that the impact, it really is felt over time. It's a much more insidious threat. And unfortunately, too many administrations, I think, have relegated it to second or third tier. It really needs to be a first tier issue. And I do believe the Biden administration, with the appointment, for example, of John Kerry, working with the international community on these issues is so important. And so I couldn't agree with you more in terms of the importance that should be attached from a national security and international security perspective to issues related to climate and how we can work together collectively. And it is an area where I think even adversaries, political adversaries, can find common ground. There are things that we in China, we in Russia, and others can and need to do in order to, again, slow this and hopefully stop it or in reverse this very, very harmful impact on our planet.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, so now we're going to bring up Liam, and I can't resist with saying that Liam Martin is a World Boston alumnus. He worked for us when he was an undergrad at Suffolk, and he's now at SAIS Johns Hopkins. And by the way, folks, our informal post-chat chat, Liam is going to be helping facilitate our informal conversation. So please join that. And Liam, go right ahead. Hi,
Thank
Liam.
you very much. And thank you, Mary, and thank you, John, for coming in, or Mr. Brennan for coming.
No, John is good.
Well, thank you, John, for coming and speaking with us, because it's really refreshing getting to hear not only your perspective from like almost half a century in government and in this field, but just to kind of get like a better feel of what the work is like. So my question is, intelligence analysts are trained to kind of resist certain kind of thought traps. So, groupthink, mirror imaging, things like that. But a lot of people in the American public, of course, don't really have that training. So when election time comes, we approach foreign policy in maybe not a skewed way, but kind of, or even a less accurate way, but a very different way. So what is one issue that you wish maybe the American public looked at in a different way, whether it's China, our relationship with Europe, Russia, and just generally how we talk about that issue? Does that make sense?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There is just so much misinformation and intentional disinformation out there that it really skews the views and perspectives of Americans across the nation. And I do think that there is so much more that we need to do from the standpoint of trying to educate the American people about facts and reality. We will always have differences of view and disagreements about policies, but I do think that we should actually at least be operating off the same set of facts. And unfortunately, I think there's too much right now that allows individuals to pursue news and information that just provides confirmation bias. And by that I mean that people already have a disposition to believe certain views or statements, and they'll go to sources that will just reinforce that view. You really need to be able to open up. I frequently will listen to other networks. I watch Fox News because I just want to hear the arguments or the perspectives. And so one of the things that I think, especially academic environments, can really help do is to provide as much factual basis as possible on some of these key issues. Like China, it's one of the most complex issues because there's so many facets to the US-China relationship. And unfortunately, I think there has been too much, certainly in the last administration, of treating certain issues or countries as monoliths. Iran is a good example. Yes, there are people in Iran that want to kill us, but not all Iranians are bad people. There are a lot of people who want Iran to come out of this international isolation and really want Iran to rejoin the community of nations. So I just think that there needs to be a more determined effort and a more concerted effort on the part of various news organizations, as well as academic institutions, think tanks, and others, to be able to provide as rich a perspective as possible on what's happening in the world. I think for too long, the United States, American people have enjoyed this isolation that we have. A great big country, we don't these two oceans on either side of us, and the and I'm not saying this disparagingly, but the ignorance of the American people about world affairs and the U.S. role in the world is stunning. That's why I think things like World Boston, the World Affairs Council, really try to promote a much more informed view. And the more that we can do this, the more that we can share views and perspectives, but also at least have a sense of what reality is and what truth is, I think the better we're going to be able to try to narrow this gap within the United States between the far right and the far left, or at least there'll be fewer elements that will gravitate toward those fringes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We'll go to Tom Ebling.
Thank you, Mary. And thank you for your comments, which have been very interesting and enlightening. You know, in the history of the CIA, there's been directors who've come from primarily a political background, like President H.W. Bush, who you mentioned, and others who've come primarily from an intelligence background, like yourself, Regina Haspel, and certainly those folks are recognized as having been very good leaders. I'm curious about your thoughts about the choice between those folks as in terms of leadership of the CIA, and whether you know, one is inherently better than the other.
Yeah, I don't think one is inherently better than the other. I do think there are benefits to each or to both. And by that I mean, when I think about Leon Panetta, great CIA director, and he had experience as a congressman. He was director of OMB. He was chief of staff to President Clinton. I mean, he had this wide array of experiences that when he came to CIA, he already had, I think, leadership skills. He had government experience, national security experience. And so he was able to hit the ground running, and he was very much admired and beloved by the CIA workforce. Bob Gates, who grew up inside of CIA, also had the opportunity to work at the White House as Deputy National Security Advisor, but he also understood deeply the intelligence mission. One of the things that I think is important at the leadership of CIA, in terms of director and deputy director, you need to have one of those people who maybe grew up in the agency, or at least has experience inside of CIA, because the CIA can be a rather confusing and complex place. And you need to have somebody who has an outside experience. When I was CIA director, Michael Morrell, a fellow CIA officer, was my deputy, but then he decided to retire. And I appointed then, or selected, Avril Haines to be my deputy. She had worked in State Department. She was the legal counsel at the National Security Council staff at the White House. And she was bringing an outside perspective. And so I was Mr. Inside, she was Mrs. Outside. When Avril decided to go back to the White House, I brought in David Cohen, who was at Treasury, because I think it is very helpful to have people who have both the inside perspective as well as people from the outside. So I do think it's that combination that is critically important. So Bill Burns, who is the nominee now for CIA, he's had extensive experience working with CIA. He was ambassador in Jordan as well as in Russia, worked closely with CIA over the years. The acting director right now, the person who is appointed by President Biden to be the new deputy, is David Cohen, my former deputy. He had served at the CIA. He knows it. So Bill Burns and David Cohen, I think, are going to make an ideal team. So again, I think it's that combination that really is important. So you can have a Leon Panetta and a Michael Morrell. You can have a John Brennan and an Avril Haines. You can have a Bill Burns and a David Cohen. So I think a lot depends on the individual, but you want to have complementary backgrounds, perspectives, and skills.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Okay.
Tom, go right ahead.
Oh, hi, thanks. Yeah, I suddenly dropped off there. I don't know what happened, but thank you, Mary. Thank you, Director Brennan. I'm retired Army. I spent some time in Saudi during the first Gulf War, and my question's on the Middle East. The Trump administration proved to be pretty active with initiatives in the Middle East, most very favorable to Israel and Saudi Arabia, and as you indicated, very confrontational with Iran. So I'd like to get your take on how you think U.S. interests stand in the Middle East right now, and what you think might be the or should be the top priorities for the new administration there.
Great.
Yeah, there are a lot of issues in the Middle East right now. I'm glad to see that the Biden administration has ended support for Saudi Arabia's war in Yemen. I think that was critically important because of the humanitarian disaster there. And I do think that there needs to be a reckoning in terms of the U.S.-Saudi relationship and how the horrific killing and dismemberment of Jamal Khashoggi is going to be addressed. Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, in my view, has responsibility for that killing. And so the U.S.-Saudi relationship is a critically important one, as you well know personally. But I do think we have to address what was this flagrant murder of a person who was resident in the United States and was a columnist for the Washington Post. I think Iran is a challenging issue. There's been a war of words going back and forth even recently. The President Khamenei, or Supreme Leader Khamenei, says that they're not going to come back into compliance with the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear agreement, until the United States, basically returns. I agree with the Biden administration that the Iranians need to revert to full compliance with the Iranian nuclear deal before there's going to be a resumption of the U.S. engagement in that. It's not in anyone's interest for the tension between the United States and Iran to increase. The Iranians can do a lot of damage in the region. That doesn't mean that we should be intimidated at all by the Iranians. It does mean, in my mind, that we should try to incentivize the Iranians to change their behavior, which is what the Iranian nuclear agreement tried to do. Although I disagree with some of the things that the Trump administration did vis-a-vis Israel, I don't believe that we should have moved the embassy to Jerusalem. That is contrary to the U.S. position since 1967, or since late 1940s, in fact. I am glad that a number of Arab states, Bahrain, UAE, and Sudan, have established relations with Israel. And I think the Biden administration can try to capitalize on that. But unfortunately, there has been no progress on the Palestinian issue. I have a personal interest in trying to ensure that the Palestinian people are going to realize the rights and freedoms of nationhood that they so deserve. Unfortunately, Bibi Netanyahu is not interested in a two-state solution. And I do think that the Biden administration should try to work with the Arab states as well as with Israel to move along a path of nationhood for Palestine. More broadly, I do think that the Biden administration needs to speak out against a number of the human rights abuses that are taking place in countries in the Middle East. Unfortunately, inside of Egypt, there has been a lot of suppression and repression of political activists and individuals. And unfortunately, President El-Sisi has opted for more of the authoritarian path than I had hoped that he would opt for a more of a political reform path. So there are a lot of pieces in that Middle East theater. Some of them are very much interconnected. And that's why I do believe the Biden administration is taking a very close and careful look at these issues. We didn't even talk about Syria and Iraq, which are complex and complicated. But I think that the Biden administration has to be realistic and modest in some of its goals and objectives, but I think it needs to have an appropriate North Star of sorts in terms of the direction that it wants to move some of these Middle East politics toward.
Great, thank you. We are at the risk of going over just a shred. We'll go to Jim Kaufman for our last question. So go right ahead, Jim.
Thanks, Mary. Mr. Brennan, given the behavior of the last administration to the intelligence community and the politicization that you referenced, do you have concerns that our allies will be less willing going forward to work with us? Or do you think the new team immediately erases those concerns?
Well, I do think that a couple of things here. One is that my former colleagues in the intelligence community, I think, are feeling good about the importance that's being attached now to intelligence by the Biden administration that wasn't being done during the Trump administration. So I think there's a sense of adrenaline and positive adrenaline within the intelligence community. Similarly, I think the same probably holds true for a lot of our allies and partners overseas. I think they were concerned about how intelligence was being politicized and being misused. And in some respects, the very cavalier attitude that I think Donald Trump and others had shown with the revealing of source and methods, sometimes inadvertently or with carelessness, sometimes intentionally, just to make political points. So the fact that the Trump team is no longer in place, I think, has sent a very positive signal to intelligence services abroad, because a lot of U.S. intelligence is derived from work that our partners and allies are doing, and they don't want their sensitive sources and methods to be compromised by a White House that is using intelligence for its own political purposes. So I think that the signal has gone out and it's being well received, that there is a return to professionalism and a return to appropriate care being given to intelligence source and methods. But also, I think it's evident now that intelligence is going to matter. And whether you're an intelligence professional in the United States or you're an intelligence professional overseas, you want your intelligence to matter. You want it to help save lives. You want it to help influence policy in a direction that's going to enhance national and international security. And so I think that fortunately we were able to survive those 4 years, but I do think that there are going to be calmer waters ahead.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay, well, unfortunately, we have run out of time, but I guess maybe on a poetic note, Intelligence Matters, that could have been a title, I think, maybe for us tonight. Thank you very much, Director Brennan, for being with us tonight. Thank you, World Boston friends and members for coming tonight. Remember, in a separate link, you have the way to join our informal post-chat chat. So thanks all again and have a good night.
Thank you, Barry.